Hey VC, it's Chad. This is my entry into the Vinyl Tag 2018, and I have a list of 20 questions here that I'm going to try to answer as honestly as possible. So the first question here is, first vinyl community channel watched on YouTube. I believe it was Audiophile Laws, maybe over last year or before that. He hasn't made any videos, maybe over one last year or something, but Audiophile Laws. Favorite record discovered through the vinyl community. I'd say probably maybe the Bob Seger System, Mongrel. What are your other hobbies? So I'm a collector at heart. So I collect comic books, like horror books. I collect regular books, novels, fiction, non-fiction, whatever. I collect vintage Japanese toys. I collect art. I collect posters. Generally just a lot of hoarding. So those are my hobbies. Why did you start collecting? I just think collecting is innate in me. Basically, I remember collecting coins and stamps as a young kid. So, but music, I've always, kind of hoarded it, and I have pretty much everything I've ever had, minus some things I've regretfully sold. But I don't know, I just enjoy collecting it, but I really enjoy listening to it the most. So, do you play any music instruments? I can play all instruments poorly. So I had a drum set from maybe the early 2000s to maybe 3 years ago. I took lessons for a couple months, and I can keep a beat. It was just fun to bang around. I played bass in a band, in like a indie kind of like noisy rock band, and I also played synthesizers and keyboards in a different kind of band as well. So I have 2 or 3 guitars. I have no drums anymore. I have a bass, and I have 2 keyboards. I have a Marauder Nova, Mini Nova keyboard, which is the signature model for Giorgio Moroder, and I have a Roland JDXI Mini as well that I like to just tinker on between my iPad and whatnot. So I haven't recorded or done anything, so I don't really play in bands. I'm just a one-man band. So have you ever worked in a record store? No, I have not. Favorite album from the year you were born? So I was born in 1976. So that would make me a Ramones kind of guy. So this is my favorite album from 1976, Ramones. What classic record have you never heard? So this is gonna ruin my cred in the VC, whatever that means. But what classic record have I not heard? So it's kind of a group of them, and it would be anything from the Beatles. Abbey Road, White Album, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's. I don't listen to the Beatles. I don't own any Beatles. I've never listened to any of them in their entirety. I've heard some of the hits, but I'm not really a fan. I guess I'm not like one of those people that are opposed just because they're popular. It's just the idea that I never really was around anybody that was a fan, and I never really discovered them myself. And I just figured it was too late by the time I was already into, a lot of other stuff. And now I kind of have a bit of a fear that I would really like them, and I'd have to like buy 100 records, or whatever their huge catalog is. So maybe one day I will revisit the Beatles, but for now they're not on my list. Show a guilty pleasure record. Like everybody else, I don't really have a guilty pleasure record. I will listen to whatever I want, whenever I want, but one that I have some apprehension about listening to around others, and it's just kind of a funny thing that I will call a guilty pleasure, is this record. The record is As Nasty as They Wanna Be by 2 Live Crew. So this is a Miami bass banger from the, I forget when this was, from the 90s or something. And they had the famous hit, Me So Honey. This is, it says 1989. But I really like that song. I listened to that one, but there's a song on here, Dick Almighty, that actually samples Kraftwerk's Man Machine, which I think is kind of funny as well. So I find these songs kind of entertaining. So 2 Live Crew. Strangest record. I have a ton of strange records, and I collect novelty records and that kind of stuff, but they're not that strange to me. But one that I do think is a bit strange is Space Jazz, composed by L. Ron Hubbard. So this is basically a soundtrack to Battlefield Earth, the book, before it was a crappy John Travolta movie. This is the soundtrack for the book, and it's played by leading artists. And what's funny is that some of the leading artists on here, Stanley Clarke, Chick Corea actually plays on here, and some of the songs are pretty good. It's basically was made on a Fairlight, so it's very like 80s synth, and there are some weird sci-fi kind of things, and there's some spacey jazz jams, just like the title says, Space Jazz. This is actually the second copy I've had. I've given away a few, and I usually buy them. This record has sort of gotten expensive. I don't know if because people think it's good or just because of the novelty of it, but I would not pay more than a few dollars for this record. But this is the weirdest record I'm going to show you today, Space Jazz. Show a picture disc. So I'm not a huge fan. I don't really, I'd prefer not to buy them, but I have probably maybe a dozen picture discs. The one I'm going to show today is a classic metal album, and it's Venom's Welcome to Hell. And the record is so noisy anyways, it's really hard to tell the difference whether it sounds good or not. So Wild Man, Wild. Best posthumous release on vinyl. I went through a few different things here. I think ultimately I will settle on whichever one I find first. How about Nirvana's Unplugged in New York? This is the year that Kurt Cobain committed suicide. This came out probably, I think, in August or something after that. So really great acoustic numbers on here. Everybody knows this record, I'm sure. So Nirvana Unplugged. What artists do you impulsively collect? So I've shown this iterations of this artist a bunch, and I pulled out some records from my collection, and it would be anything from Glenn Danzig projects, and these are some of my original Sam Hain records. I have 3 or 4 copies of each record. I don't know why. Well, I know why. They're all different pressings, different labels, etc. So anything by Glenn Danzig I pick up in the store. I try to only buy originals though, which you don't find too often in the store. But I do have a few bootlegs, just fun live records or cool covers or something. So best blind buy. I picked actually the one that I'm listening to now. And what did I do with it? I think it's called Edie Confa. The album is The Pace Setters. And I found this sometime last year. This is I saw Brian Eno's name on it. He produced it. It's on the Editions EG label that most of his records are on. And I actually, when I first picked this up, I thought it was like a reggae record, but it's actually like a world funk kind of fusion record, which it's pretty cool, and it's pretty was pretty cheap. So Eddie Confa. Blind spot artist. I think I picked The Clash. So I listened to The Clash a lot. The first record, and I have London Calling, and I had showed Combat Rock that I picked up not too long ago, but I don't have any of their other records, and I don't even believe I've ever listened to them, like Sandinista or Give 'Em Rope, I think. So I would say that those, I have some missing spots in my Clash collection that I should probably look into. So favorite album cover, I've mentioned this before, and this goes back to my Danzig collection. My favorite album cover is actually Sam Hain's Initium. I don't know, I just think it's really just was when I first saw it. Every time I look at it, it just reminds me of when I was young, and it's just a really great photograph. It almost looks like a drawing or something. You don't know exactly until you look up close, but it's a photograph of the band just covered in blood, and it just looks, the black and white is really striking against the red blood. It's just a really great photo. So Initium. Name a musician you've met. I've actually met a few people, not like that we've hung out or anything. I've done a few like meet and greet packages when I've been on or gone to some concerts. I had showed or mentioned before John Carpenter that I went to see a few times last summer. I got a few albums signed by him and met the band. I couldn't find those right now, but another band that I met is the Italian prog rock legends and soundtrack legends, Goblin. So this is a tour EP from the band New Goblin that actually toured in 2013, and it has almost most of the original members. I think only one is missing, but this is a EP they recorded for the tour. That was the first time they ever toured the U.S. And I did a meet and greet with them. I got to watch their pre-show routine, etc. And they signed this record, the whole band. So it was pretty cool. They speak okay English. They're Italian, but it was a lot of fun. And I've seen them. I saw them twice or three times in a row on that tour. I followed them from like Baltimore to Philly, and then they played Pittsburgh maybe a year later or something. So Goblin. A record with sentimental value, and for that one I picked Megadeth's Rust in Peace. I'm not sure if I ever mentioned this one before, but the record itself, this one doesn't have a value to me, but Rust in Peace was the very first compact disc that I ever got when this record came out in 1990 or so. So I just always, I mean, there's also some great stuff on here, but this is probably my favorite Megadeth record, and I just think it's cool. Every time I see it, it reminds me of when I was young and the first time I got a CD. So Megadeth, Rust in Peace. A favorite album that no one else seems to know about. So I don't know. Everybody knows about everything these days, but the one I picked out is one that I have a lot of records from the catalog, and it's Ministry, and it is their first album, With Sympathy. So most people only know Ministry based on their more industrial, metal kind of records, Psalm 69, Land of Rape and Honey, Mine is a Terrible Thing to Taste, and then this is their very first record, 1983, and it sounds nothing like anything they've ever done. This is a synth pop record, and it's really funky. It's more like a picture like a early Depeche Mode or something. It's got really deep bass grooves, real funky. The whole A side is just a bunch of club. I have a bunch of singles from here. I call them like club bangers because they're really great, like 80s. You'd find them, people playing them in 80s nights or new wave stuff. But I Wanted to Tell Her is my favorite song, and then Work for Love is also great. So I'm not sure if I've ever seen anybody mention With Sympathy, but the first Ministry record. And the last question is favorite album of a genre you didn't know very well. So I just started getting into jazz, and I'm going to pick the milk toast of jazz, and it's Miles Davis, the Bitches Brew record, and this is a Columbia Records 2i pressing that I picked up, and I really like. I'm more into. Well, I started getting into jazz through fusion kind of stuff. I like the more funky side, and I really like this Miles Davis record. I like On the Corner a lot, and I like Coltrane, but I really don't have. I probably have less than 30 jazz records, but I hope to get into some other weirder side of jazz. So, but this is one of my starts. So, Miles Davis. So that's my 2018 vinyl tag questions that I blew through. So, thanks for watching.